Welcome to Equip Weekly Bible Studies. I'm your host, Brad DuFault, and we are in the book of Genesis. We are now going to look at the life of Joseph, the last main character and my favorite character in this book. He is the son of Jacob, also known as Israel, and Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. Abraham was really important because God made a promise to him that his descendants, his kids and grandkids and whatnot, they would grow so big that they would no longer be a family, they would be a nation. And God would use that nation, called the nation of Israel, he would use them to bless the entire world. Later on, we see how that promise is fulfilled, that Jesus came through that nation of Israel, and he died for every one of us, died in our place, and raised from the dead, so that we can have forgiveness and eternal life. And all that started with this promise to Abraham, and the fact that his descendants would become this great nation. And a lot of the book of Genesis is about that promise. The way it goes is God will promise something, and then it will seem impossible. But the people who are faithful, who trust God, still believe it when it seems impossible. Like Abraham. He would have thought, how are my children supposed to become a great nation when I don't even have any children? He wasn't able to have kids till he was really old, so he had to trust that God's promise was still going to come true. And then when God told him that the promise was going to go through his son Isaac, that his son Isaac would have lots of kids, how was that supposed to happen when Abraham was asked to sacrifice Isaac and kill him? Which ended up not happening, and we have a whole teaching about that event and what it means and why it's important. But today, the same thing kind of comes up again, because now Jacob, also known as Israel, his 12 sons are going to become the 12 tribes of Israel. They're all going to have big families, become tribes, and that's the way that God's promise is going to be fulfilled. But how is that promise supposed to be fulfilled if these brothers are all fighting and they're all going to kill each other? And that brings us to the story of one of those sons, Joseph. We'll see today that same idea of God's promise being hard to believe, but people still need to trust it. And this time, God speaks through dreams. So go ahead and read Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 to 13 in your paper Bible. And if you don't have one, I got a link in the description where you can read it online. Last time we saw that Jacob learned to put his trust in God, but he didn't learn to be that great of a dad, because he clearly has a favorite. Joseph is his favorite son. He makes him this beautiful robe, and Joseph wears it around all the time. And then Joseph himself just can't keep his mouth shut. It's not like he did something wrong when he was telling his brothers and parents about his dream, but still, he probably should have known better, especially after the first time they got really mad. He goes on blabbing about this other dream. His dreams all have to do with things bowing down to him, these things that seem to represent his family. And the question is, what are these dreams? It turns out they are God speaking. And that means that these dreams are going to come true. Which makes it really funny in the story when his brothers say things like, "You're going to rule over us," and his dad says things like, "You think me and your mom and your brothers are going to bow down to you?" Because if the dream is from God, then yes, those things are totally going to happen. But like the other promises in the book of Genesis, that promise might get challenged. In other words, things might happen that make it seem impossible, that there's no way that Joseph would ever be in a position where his brothers and parents are going to bow down to him. And that brings us to verse 18. Jacob, the father, sends Joseph to go check on the other brothers when they're with the sheep really far away. And then this happens. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. To kill their own brother. These guys are evil. "Here comes that dreamer," they said. "Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns," which was a hole in the ground made for holding water. A deep hole, so they were going to toss him way down there. "We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." We will indeed, won't we? But when Reuben, one of the brothers, heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. Dun, dun, dun. "Let's not kill him," he said. "Why should we shed any blood?" Ah, Reuben, the hero we need. He says, "Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. Okay, not much of a hero, but better than the other brothers, right? At least he didn't want to kill him. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. They grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty and there was no water in it, so he would have landed with a thud. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat, because plotting murder and throwing people down holes makes you hungry, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him to Egypt. Next, they tricked their father into thinking he was dead, that Joseph was killed by wild animals, and then they sell him as a slave to Egypt. And you're thinking, that's not a happy ending. God made a promise about his life. Right, that's not a happy ending because it's not the ending. We're still in the middle of the story, and that's how it is with our lives too. God promises us things, then we might look around and be like, where is this? For example, Jesus says, "I give you peace." And then we have anxiety and trouble and pandemics. We say, where's the peace? But the problem is we're still in the middle of the story. We don't know how it's going to end. We don't know how God is going to come through. Joseph doesn't know how God is going to come through. But we need to do what Joseph does. We'll see more about this next time. That is, when God promises something, we believe it, we trust it, and we count on God to come through. And that's going to give us hope when things are rough. And we need that. We're in the middle of the story because we don't know how it ends. At least not specifically anyway. We don't know how God is going to come through. But if we have God's promises, we know that he will. So today we saw Joseph the dreamer. Next time we'll see what kind of man Joseph has become when we meet Joseph the slave. So join us then, and until then, be strong in grace.